How are you doing this morning? Give us a hello in the chat. Let us know how you're doing and where you're zooming in from this morning. Good morning, Olga. Hi, Kaylee. Tampa, great, awesome. From FIU Online and
Wonderful.
Weston, got South Florida, Florida Gulf Coast University, great. Over on the West Coast and Texas, I see from engineering in Dallas and engineering school from Davie. Awesome. Hello from Oregon. Good morning. Great. We are excited that you are here with us today. We are going to jump right into this morning's leadership lecture. And we have Sara Mathew here with us. Here to give a proper introduction is one who will be co-facilitating with me this morning for this lecture is Manny Gonzalez. Manny Gonzalez is the chair of our advisory board. We have a fantastic external board of advisors to the center who provide great insights and guidance and support. And Manny has been on that board since the inception of the center. And he is the current chair. He is also the president of MGM Consulting. And he is a former executive at Procter & Gamble. And you'll see some overlap here with Sara. So Manny, with that, and without further ado, welcome and take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Hillard. Good morning to everyone. I'd like to really thank Sara Mathew for being with us here this morning. Sara is the chairperson of the board of Freddie Mac. She's also on the boards of directors of Reckitt Benckiser, State Street, as well as NextGen SPAC. Sara is also former chair and CEO of Dun & Bradstreet. I had the pleasure of working with Sara when we were at Procter & Gamble together and know firsthand what a great person and what a great leader Sara is. You don't get to become the chairperson of the board of Freddie Mac and sit on 3 major company boards, as well as be the former chair and CEO of one of the biggest firms in the world, Dun & Bradstreet, without being an incredibly talented and incredibly persistent person. Sara is a tremendous leader, tremendous manager, a great developer of talent, and we're very proud to have her here today to talk to us a little bit about her story from clerk to chairman. Sara Mathew dares to lead. Sara, welcome.
Thank you, Manny. I hope everybody can hear me. And good morning, everyone. I love the little scrolling of good mornings. It's so important for me to engage. And to be quite honest, I was really hoping that I would be right there in Miami with all of you. I love Miami. And it was a great excuse to go and partake of the wonderful food you have in Miami, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, that was not to be. So we decided to kind of shake things around a little bit and try something different. Rather than have me talk to you for 30 to 40 minutes, which can be a little tedious, what I thought I would do is just start out with a brief introduction, tell you a bit about myself, a bit about my story. Manny and I will then have an exchange, a short Q&A back and forth, as well as Nathan. And then we want to engage all of you because it would be most helpful if we actually get a chance to talk, to engage, because my objective is to be helpful to all of you. And I do remember when I was in probably your stage of your career early on, there were questions I had I was afraid to ask because I think, I might look stupid. What would people think? Well, nothing is off limits. You can ask me whatever you want. We're going to be here for that full time. And hopefully this is helpful to you. That's really the reason why I'm here. So let me start with a little bit about myself. So like many of you, mine is a classic immigrant story. I was born and educated in India. I was born to a family of doctors. And I would describe myself as the classic underachiever. I was not a terribly good student. I could always pull things out at the end. But the Irish Catholic convent school that I went to, the Irish nuns would constantly be sitting down with my mother, talking about me, the individual, who would not achieve her potential and that was capable of so much more. I preferred sports over studies. And ultimately, what brought me to this US was marriage. So my husband was already with Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. And I arrived here in the 80s with no American degree, no work experience, and I mean none at all. I hadn't even bagged groceries, and $8 in my pocket, which, by the way, I spent on chocolates at the Frankfurt airport. So theoretically, I arrived here penniless, no money. And once I arrived here, this was the early 80s, it was not a particularly good time for the US. Interest rates were extremely high. We were going through a mini recession. And finding a job was really difficult. Now, why did I want a job? I wouldn't describe myself as an ambitious person. I actually had no ambition. If you ask me what was my ambition coming out of college, I wanted to be a kept woman. I thought I'd marry somebody rich, that would give me a nice lifestyle, and it would be wonderful. But arriving here in the US, I realized my husband had a lot of student debt. And I decided I'm going to start working. That is the only reason I put my toe into corporate America. It is so that I could have money to shop. I know as women on the call, you understand that's an important basic need. I wanted to shop without having to ask my husband for money. So I come to the US and I want to get a job. And I realized getting a job without an American degree and without work experience is borderline impossible. And I should take you back to the early 80s, and the way the process worked is you looked in the Sunday paper for jobs. Now, I had a master's degree in finance and accounting. I was really very qualified, no work experience, but I had good education. And I would circle all the jobs that I thought I was qualified for. And on Monday morning, I would send all my resumes out. By Friday, I would get 90% of the rejects back. 10% didn't even bother to respond. And this process went on for around 2 and 3 months. And then one day, miraculously, I get a letter inviting me to come in for an interview at Procter & Gamble. And I was so excited. So I went out, bought Working Woman magazine, realized this is how I ought to dress. I wore this navy blue suit with a white button-down Oxford shirt and a red bow tie. I looked like a clown, to be really honest with you. But back then, that was supposed to be the way you dressed if you wanted a job. I went into Procter & Gamble with a little briefcase. There was nothing in it, but I thought made me look professional. And it was very fast. I did a 1-hour test. I did 3 interviews. I got the job. I was ecstatic. Well, until I came home. My husband looks at the $350 a week pay offer and asked me, why am you accepting a job as a clerk? You're so educated. In a moment, to be really honest with you, I had no idea about the difference between being a manager and being a clerk. I did not know what it meant to be a CEO, a chairman, nothing. I didn't even know what those words meant. But that was $350 a week that I did not have, and I said, I'm going to take that job. Funny story is, at the end of the first week, I get my paycheck, and it's not $350. And I was afraid to ask anybody the question, so I called my husband and say, you know, they didn't pay me $350, and what is FICA and FUTA, and what are all these things? Yeah, taxes. So I want to give you a sense for how naive I was when I started out. But by a stroke of good fortune, I started out with Procter & Gamble. And as many of you know, Procter is an amazing company. It promotes from within. And so if you come in and you do a good job, you work your way up the ranks. There's one small problem. Procter has 2 doors. One door is the clerical door, which is the door I entered, and the other door is the management door. And generally, the 2 doors have 2 different paths, and they never cross. But I'm happy to tell you, things really worked out for me. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the Q&A. In 2.5 years, I was ahead of everyone who started in management. And by this time, I got an MBA at night because I needed an American stamp. I was told nobody ever gets an MBA in 2 years while you work full-time. Well, I did. And that is the first thing I want all of you to understand. Anything is possible. Anything is possible if 1, you really want it, and 2, you believe you can. And that is the first lesson I have for all of you. You have to believe before you can see. And the reason I say that is there are so many people, so many reasons why you think you cannot. But the minute you think you can't, it's too difficult, I'm not worthy, I'm going to tell you, the rest follows. It's not going to happen. So that's lesson number 1. Anything is possible. You have to believe it. And if you don't believe it, I'm going to tell you, it really gets in the way of what you are capable of. Because at the core, I'm one of those people who believe that each and every one of you is destined for greatness. We are all capable of greatness. We're all capable of great things. And the only thing, the first thing that gets in the way of us achieving greatness is right up here between your head. It is your beliefs. It is that quiet conversation in your head that tells you you cannot, you're not capable, you don't have the education, you didn't go to Harvard. Well, I'm going to tell you, you don't need that. Start with belief. You have to believe yourself. The reason why the belief portion of it is hard is because those beliefs are put in your head very early on. There were people who told you you can't. There were the nuns in my school who told me I was nothing but a troublemaker. But I had one person in my corner, my mom. She believed in me for reasons I still don't understand. And by the way, it was not fake. It was true belief that I was capable of extraordinary things. And ultimately, I essentially lived up to her expectation. So it's so important you have people around you who believe in you, because they are the people who get you through the really difficult times. Let me move on to the second lesson I have for all of you. Never stop daydreaming. Now, I was called a daydreamer in school because I was always looking out the window. There was always something more interesting. I'm going to tell you that dreams are the beginning of great things. And the reason I talk about dreams, it is because it is not easily achievable. And I think dreams are where aspirations start. And I think it's really important to get very clear on your aspiration. What do you want from your career? What do you want from life? What do you want from your partner? Get really, really clear about aspiration and then convert them into goals. Now, what do I mean by goals? They need to be smart. They need to be metric oriented and time bound. You need to know what you want to get done and by when. So when I started out as a clerk, I set myself an aspiration that I was going to be a manager in 2 years. Now, the fastest time anybody had made it from that clerical position I was in to management at P&G was 7 years. Now, I made it in a year, and my point is, I had a clear plan around how I was going to achieve that aspiration. So remember, those dreams, convert them into goals, and then develop a plan in terms of how you're going to get there, and have milestones along the way to make sure you're on track or not. The third thing, don't be afraid to take risk. This one is a difficult one because there's lots of people who are going to tell you, don't take risk. Now, when you take risk, I'm going to tell you one of the consequences is you might fail. Okay, so failure is in many ways a part of this entire process, is the reason why we don't take risk. And I'm going to tell you, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Try to do that thing, try to make that leap, try, and when you fail, which you will, pick yourself up, move forward, focus on the solution, and don't obsess about what went wrong. You want to spend a moment to learn, because I have found over time, and I have failed so many times, failure is going to teach you much, much more than success ever will. It is not about the fact that you failed, it is how you choose to respond. So remember that, don't be afraid to take risk. And then the fourth and the final one is make leadership a life journey. Make it something you want to do forever. And I'd like to spend a moment and talk a little bit about leadership. And I'm going to use a little chart, which I hope is actually helpful to you. Now, so much has been written about leadership over the years, and that's because it's such an esoteric subject and people are still writing about it because nobody is really clear. I don't purport to have the answer to leadership, but what I'm going to share is my definition of leadership, why I believe it's so important, and to give you a framework to think about it. And I'm going to make it really, really simple. It's going to start out complicated, but it'll become very simple. So I'm going to say that leadership to me begins with purpose. So let's talk a bit about purpose. Every one of us strives to live purpose-driven lives. Purpose is about having meaning. So why? It's the why of what you do. The aspiration is what you want. Purpose is about why. And if that's not meaningful enough to you, you're not going to really push to achieve it the way I think you should and can do it. But let's start with the components of leadership. For me, leadership begins with the foundation of values. I believe values are sacrosanct and you can never violate them. Values for me include things like integrity, respect for others, teamwork, performance excellence. I have the highest bar for myself. There's not a person who can have a higher bar. And I believe this is the foundation on which you build your personal leadership. Then come the competencies. I think competencies are actually easier. You pick these up at work, you may pick these up at school. And I'm going to talk about what I describe as the 5 E's. And these 5 E's are actually from P&G, where I spent 18 years of my life. It starts with envision. This is the ability to develop a vision, chart a course, and set direction. Then energize, to get a group of people really excited about your vision, because you cannot go it alone. You need a team to go with you. Execute, to convert this vision to a simple plan that is easy to monitor, track, and execute. If people don't know what they have to do, you will never achieve the vision. Empower. This is what I struggled with the most. It is to learn to let go and hand the baton on to somebody else and allow them to lead for you. And finally, edge. Edge is this inimitable quality that ensures you never, ever give up, especially when the going is tough. But for me, the final and the most critical component of leadership are attributes. Now, these are situational, so they are very difficult to sustain. To me, attributes include things like courage, risk-taking, decisiveness, mental toughness, but also humility and caring. But ultimately, when you think about it, each of us leverages some combination of these values, competencies, and attributes to do what we think is right. But to the observer, all they can see are the results you produce, but more importantly, what they will remember are the behaviors you exhibit. So at its core, to me, and this is why I said it'll make it really simple for you, leadership is about behavior. So if you want to become a better leader, you have to search hard, open yourself up for feedback, and commit to do better every day. You need to be able to freely articulate, what are you good at? And what are you not so good at? What are you working on? So I'll make it easy for you. I'll give you a little bit of a sense for who I am and what my leadership qualities are like. I'm going to start by saying I am pretty good strategically. I'm a natural problem solver. I get things done. But here are the things I am working on. I'm a terrible listener, and you can tell probably from now how I talk too much. So I'm a terrible listener. I am tough, I am demanding, and I play to win. If you're on the other side of the table for me, it's not a lot of fun. But I can tell you, by opening myself up to feedback, it is the most empowering thing to do. It is the most powerful thing when somebody tells you, Sarah, the way you talk to me really bothered me deeply. And I'm able to say, oh my God, I am so sorry, because I would never intend to hurt anybody. But when you open yourself up to work on what you need to work on, let me tell you, the team rallies behind you and ultimately you benefit from it. So this to me is what I wanted to share with you in terms of my journey. I should not be here. I often call myself an accidental CEO. There are days I wonder how I ever made this so far. I started out as a clerk with $350 a week. Like I told you, I wasn't a great student. I was an underachiever and I really didn't have ambition. But this belief that was put into my head by my mom, whom I am eternally grateful for. My parents did this with all 3 of us, with 3 girls. Further cemented by my husband of 40 years, who also has this belief in me, which I don't know I really deserve, is what keeps me going. The second thing is my dreaming. I'm a dreamer and I will never stop dreaming. The third is I've taken so much risk and failed so many times in my life that I now realize that failure is just a part of life. It is really the ability to learn to do something and to do it better the next time around, and to be accountable when things go wrong. And finally, this entire concept of leadership, which, as I said earlier, is essentially what has made my life have purpose. So that essentially is my story. I'm going to pause right now and see, Manny, any questions from the audience or any questions you have for me so we can get this conversation started.
Well, that's great, Sarah. Thank you for that very inspiring story that you went through. I think now one of the insights that if somebody ever criticizes somebody else for shopping, you can always say it's a great motivator. So I
Absolutely.
think that's a great insight there. You talk a lot about, and again, it's great about the values that you mentioned, talk about, because I'm sure you have a lot of experiences with people in different realms. And, you know, when I hear you talk about Dare to Dream, and you start off from a clerk to chairman, you went literally from the back of the room to being on stage, which is an incredible transformation. But what do you say to someone who doesn't have the aptitude or motivation to lead, or feel like they don't have the aptitude or motivation to lead? What do you say to them?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying I have been inordinately blessed, and I recognize that. I really do. But for the person who feels they don't have the aptitude, well, I'm going to encourage you to think about where I started. I was an underachiever. I was not a terrific student. I didn't have any ambition, right? And that's why I think it's so important that you think about belief. Belief is actually what drives us. If you believe you can, I think Walt Disney said it, if you believe it, you can do it. But the more important thing is you have to believe before you see. Because there's so many things outside of you telling you, you can't do it, that's not possible, you shouldn't be, you know, there's 100 things that tell you you cannot. So I'm going to say work on belief. In order to work on belief, you need to have people who actually believe in you. It may have been that, think about that high school teacher who believed in you, and that's how you got through your math classes. Belief matters. And if you don't have belief and it wasn't given to you as the gift that I had as a child, you need to work on developing that belief. So let's talk a little bit about my situation. Like I said, I started out as a clerk. No American degree, no work experience. That is why P&G put me in that clerical job. At P&G, and Manny, you know this, if you start out as a clerk, you retire a clerk. Again, with no American degree, no work experience, I knew that I would have to not just do my job, I would have to so far exceed expectations. That is the only way I would be ever considered to be a manager. So whenever I worked late, which I did quite often, I refused to turn in an overtime card. I know that might sound crazy, but I didn't, because I felt I was onto something, and it was something that was really important, and I felt I could get it done. And actually what happened at P&G, Manny, is 6 months into my job, I uncovered a plan to save about $500,000, which at the St. Bernard plant where I worked was a big deal. It got the attention of the plant manager. And it was a simple thing called economic order quantity. Good Lord, I can't believe I remember all of this. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So here's the story. So at St. Bernard, we used to make something called DITMAC, ditallomethyl ammonium chloride. Now that's also scary. I remember the name. And it was a softener that goes into Downy and Bold. It essentially is what makes your clothes feel soft. And we would order that, and all of the softener was made at the St. Bernard plant. We ordered by truckload, and whenever they came in, my job was essentially to match every truckload that arrived with the invoice that was actually a payment to the supplier. And that's how we closed it out. That's the basic separation of duties in accounting. So I was doing that, and one time I find this $350,000 bill, but there's no rail car of DITMAC available. So I called purchasing, and they said, oh, that's okay, that's just the penalty. We didn't meet a minimum ordering quantity, so you should go ahead and pay it, and here's the number that approves it. And if I was a typical clerk, what I should have done is I should have stamped it and paid it. I was curious. That was an economic order. I mean, why we didn't need an order quantity? Well, let me figure out more. So I actually had very good programming skills. Like I told you, I had a master's finance and accounting, and actually was fluent in Fortran, COBOL. I know these are old languages, not Ruby on Rails or Python. So these are very old languages. I'm sorry, I'm dating myself. But I went into the system, programmed it, and I realized that we set an order quantity annually and broke it into 4, 1 per quarter. We had missed the quarter by 1 truckload, for which we were paying this penalty for the entire quarter. So I went to the person who ran the department, and I told him, I said, look, I think we can fix this very easily. We're paying about $500,000 every year on poor ordering. We should just order into inventory so that we don't pay this. And the long and short of it is that was such a simple thing. And that got me the attention that 6 months later, the plant manager wanted me to move to manufacturing at P&G as a manager. The minute finance heard that manufacturing wants to take one of their people, Clay, who was at that time like a director, came down to see who is Sara Mathew, and literally I got promoted 9 months later. So part of it is belief you can. Part of it is not allowing the external noise to get in the way. And part of it is staying maniacally focused on doing just not the good job, but a very good job. This is so important early in your career. As you move up, leadership takes over, leadership becomes more important. So don't say you don't have the aptitude or the motivation. If you put in time, you've probably read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He's one of my favorite authors. 10,000 hours, you can be good at anything. And don't tell me you can't. If you can't, you're not motivated, it's because somebody hasn't made it interesting enough for you. Because once you get motivated and you're curious, the sky is the limit. So I'm going to say, absolutely, you can.
Well, that's great, Sarah. That's a great story. And I think all of us listening to your story can see also that one of your focus areas was always going beyond expectations.
Always.
You always went beyond expectations, whatever they set for you, which obviously got everybody's attention, multiple people's attention in different functions, which is an amazing story. Another question for you. You know, we have seen, you mentioned about taking risks, but we have seen that taking risks can lead to some bad outcomes, some very bad outcomes, like we saw in the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And I want to get your thoughts about that perspective, as well as the perspective on, we saw this in 2008, 2009, when people focus almost solely on the benefit for themselves and them winning versus them focusing on the value of the business, the value of the company, and doing what's right and what maximizes company value. And instead they focus on their own position, thinking that, you know, they can win the battle, but they end up losing the war because they and the company eventually are worth a lot less money. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, the 2008 crisis, I could never condone what happened. And as a chair of Freddie Mac, I'm intimately familiar with how it happened. I think it was a cocktail of internal and external factors that drove this. So let's get the context. 2001, 9/11, the economy is struggling. And the president tells Americans, you know, we need to go out, we need to spend, we need to essentially figure out a way to get the economy back on track. Bernanke lowers interest rates, so money is available cheap. And then the banks did something which is really terrible. We created what is called collateralized debt obligations, which is essentially selling mortgages, bundling and selling mortgages to investors, because it's an asset-backed security. And essentially in that process, selling so much for it that investors demanded so much for it, that in order to feed that demand, they had to provide more mortgages, which meant more mortgages had to go to people who probably should not have had a mortgage. And that's unfortunate because they were not told the whole story, right? They were told that, well, you know, I remember my housekeeper told me that she wanted to get a mortgage because it was cheaper than rent. And I remember telling her, Marjorie, no, let me take a look at the contract. And it was a 0% ARM. So literally she would have no upfront payments, but then it would rapidly crank up in terms of interest rate. And I told her, no, this is going to be a problem. She's really upset with me for advising her against taking a mortgage. But what happened was terrible. But what also happened, the way I would describe that is exactly what you said, Manny. It was unbridled, uninformed risk-taking for personal gain. And ultimately, all of us as taxpayers paid for it, which is so, so unfortunate. What I'm talking about risk-taking is personal risk-taking as a leader. It is about stretching and reaching to do something that's extraordinary. And my point is, when the solution is not clear, you don't know exactly how something needs to be done, you're going to have to take risk to do that. And I think it'll be good here. Let me give you another story. So, just think of it as circa 1992. I was appointed the head of investor relations. And if you're wondering what that is the job of marketing the company to investors. It was one of my most exciting, fun jobs. So since I had this insatiable need to essentially change everything, I thought the way we communicated with investors, which is one-on-one by phone, and I repeated the same story like 40 times over the course of the week, would be far more efficient if we did it like this, like a webcast. Now remember, it's 1992, so this was not an easy thing to do. And I got John Pepper, who was P&G CEO at that time, agreement to proceed. And then everything went wrong. So now our results that quarter were somewhat lackluster. So that was a small problem. But by the time I was done with the call, I wiped out 4 billion of P&G's market cap just like that after the call.
Wow.
It was my idea. It was my script. It was definitely my fault. At 4 o'clock that evening, John Pepper asked me to come up to his office. And I just remember cringing to go up there because I failed and I felt terrible. This was my idea. I pushed him to do it and now I screwed up. And I said, John, I am so sorry. And I went back downstairs. It was Tuesday. I remember it like it was yesterday. And as the week progresses, the stock drops even further. Most people at Procter thought my career was over. And to be candid, by the end of the week, I thought my career was over. But by the weekend, the solution was clear. We had to stay with telecast, but we had to get it right the next time. I had a plan. So I come back all fired up on Monday morning, and I find a neatly handwritten note, a Dear Sarah note. It was from our CEO, John Pepper, saying, we should never do this again because the old way of one-on-one phone calls clearly works better. Now, I knew this was a mistake. So I went back to him and I pled my case. When I think back to that meeting, it was clear John did not want to try this again. I could see the pain on his face, but after he listened to my impassioned plea, he said, okay, Sarah, one more time. He gave us a second chance, and that second time was magic. And from then on, that's the only way P&G communicates with investors. Now, for me personally, it's been almost 20 years, but I can still remember that week, that bitter taste of failure. You see, it's not just that I failed very publicly. I was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, I was on CNBC, I even made the papers in India. By the way, that got my mom really excited. It was the first time she was seeing my name in print. She didn't fully understand the context. She was showing it to all her friends about her daughter, and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna die. But the reality is, I learned so much from this mistake. I learned to pick myself up and try again. And my biggest learning is what I said at the outset. Failure will teach you much more than success ever will. And that didn't become apparent to me until I decided to leave P&G to join D&B. So I called John Pepper to say goodbye. You know, this is a man who gave me a second chance. And it's that belief in me that's made me the person I am. So I wanted to thank him for that. Now, I kid you not, imagine my surprise. He could not remember this incident. He said, you know, Sarah, I remember it. Because he said, when I think of investor relations, I think you set the benchmark for excellence. So I will tell you this. You know, Winston Churchill said it the best. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. So when you fail, you pick yourself up. You figure out, you take accountability. I didn't blame anybody. It was so easy to say, you know, the lawyers wanted to put this in. I wish I had. No, don't. I wanted to do it. I messed up. It was my job to fix it. And when you fix it after you fail, I'm going to tell you, it'll be a beautiful thing because you've had all the learning, but you need to have that courage to continue. And I think that courage comes from belief. It comes from those voices in your head that say, you know what, you better hunker down. You better not, you know, show your face any place because, you know, things are not going to work out. So when I talk about taking risk, I feel that's essentially pretty much sums it up for me.
Sarah, again, that's an amazing story, and clearly it shows the example of how important it is to be a listener, right? Because John Pepper was willing to listen to you. Had he not been willing to listen to you, your career and your life may have taken a very different turn.
Exactly. Not only did he listen to me, he gave me that second chance. He didn't want to give me the second chance. So if you're a leader and somebody comes with you with this passionate plea, I always let them go. Because that's essentially something you don't have to worry about because they're passionate about it. In fact, today I would say my favorite risk taker is Elon Musk. Not the fact that he tweets things that are material information and gets in trouble with the SEC, because he continuously pushes boundaries. Otherwise, why would somebody who has no experience in the automotive business decide to make a car? Now, I own a Tesla, and let me tell you, I will never go back. It's an amazing car. It's like driving your iPhone. It is intuitive. It is phenomenal. But more than that, let's remember, was it a straight path? No. Remember, Tesla stock has had a lot of ups and downs, and there was a time when most people decided that he would never make it, right? But did it pay off? Yes. Did he stay doggedly determined? Yes. And now Tesla is worth more than the three, Detroit automotive companies combined.
That's a
So part
great,
of it is it all is connected, man. You can't have one and leave the other. You have to have that dogged determination. You have to take risks. When things fail, you have to pick yourself up. You have to dust yourself off quickly. Don't obsess about the problem. Focus on the solution. And
right.
be open to leadership.
We're going to turn it over now to Nathan to take some
All right.
questions from the audience.
Sure,
We
sure.
appreciate that comment, Sarah, and also the fact that John Pepper, who is a great human being, he also has been a great sponsor of United Way, and I think at this time of crisis, also us as leaders, how we give back to our communities and to other people is very important. He's certainly doing that.
Oh, man.
So we appreciate his leadership in that. So now I'm going to turn it to Nathan, Dr. Nathan Hiller, for questions from the audience, which I know we have a lot.
Yeah, well,
Very good.
we always appreciate, so we appreciate that a number of you submitted questions when you registered. So thank you for those. And we'll try and get to some of them. We have a feedstock of questions, and you feel free to also ask. I know. So someone had asked today what your thoughts are on this idea of servant leadership. What are the, what is it? I mean, it's a buzzword. What are its limits?
I believe servant leadership is the only way to go. And I wish I had learned that about 10 to 20 years earlier. I would have been far more effective.
So what does that mean to you?
To me, it's not about you. It's about everybody else. But the role of the leader, as servant leadership implies, is to serve. So people often think leadership is the person in front with the flag. No, sometimes the leadership is already, so the person at the back providing water, carrying water, doing the heavy lifting. It is about understanding that your job is to serve a broader purpose, something bigger than just the here and now, and to think of all your stakeholders. So to me, servant leadership starts with the word service. So if you think about leadership as being, well, I'm the person in the front, I'm the person who directs, I tell you what to do. Yes, that is one form of leadership, but leadership doesn't work without followership. So I would think of them as two sides of the same coin. So if you're a leader and you have nobody following you, well, you're kind of a crazy person by yourself. So in order to engender followership, I think it's so very important to think of service as essentially a defining way you define your behavior. Because remember, at the end of the day, it is about behavior. It is your actions and it is your words. For me personally, because I'm such a talker, I had to learn to shut up. Because I tend to be argumentative and I'm so focused on winning that sometimes I can knock people down. I can forget about how somebody else is feeling. So part of this is to realize that my job is to really help others be successful. We will eventually get the ball down the goal line, but I will tell you, when you have a team running, nobody can stop you. And I've tried it both ways. I've tried it leading, and there were times when I've actually gotten the ball over the goal line all by myself. But I will tell you, you get it there faster when you play the role of service and let other people actually take a lot of the credit and actually lead for you.
Yeah, I saw on Mad Money, which is one of my guilty pleasures, on CNBC.
Mine too.
Yeah, Jim Cramer, who is the host, was interviewing a CEO, and he kept talking about all of the things he had done at the company. And I recorded it because I'm like, what does this tell us about how this individual thinks about how they lead? I mean, it's just, there's a lot and he said it about 8 or 9 times. I never the we and what he had done. And I just thought, what message are you sending to your team?
I know.
You're sending a clear message.
Yeah, Nathan, there's only one time you say I, and that is when you screw up. So when I took D&B on this leadership technology re-platform and I failed, I stood up in front of my team and I apologized for letting them down. Because that's not the time to place blame on the CIO and this one and that one. No, as a leader, the one time you say I is when you're accountable for things, when things go wrong. You should freely give credit to everybody else when all is well. Because at that time when a ball is dropped, it has to be me, because I made the decision to put certain people in certain roles. That was my decision. So whichever way you look at it, the buck stops with me. And
So,
so that's the only time you say I.
so how do you balance that? So if we take that, and I believe it. I mean, it's important, but we also know that women tend to be less self-promotional, right? And less likely to get noticed sometimes for their accomplishments. How do you balance that? Because if you sort of take that, well, I'm going to give credit to everyone else, do you potentially not get noticed?
Look, this is a women issue, and so I'm speaking to the women in the audience, and I'm going to speak from the heart. If you're a woman, I got to tell you, you have to be significantly better. But I would tell you, do not compromise on your authenticity. So I often say as a woman, I had a choice to pick. I had a choice to make. Damned if I do and doomed if I don't. Damned if I'm outspoken, assertive, and pushy. Doomed to nothing if I kept quiet. I picked damned, okay? So all my career, I was told that, Sarah, you need to be, I mean, I don't think men get this ever. You are too aggressive, okay? And I would accept that as something that I had to work on, but I was not going to change who I am. So in other words, if we're sitting in a meeting and you tell me, Nathan, something that is absolutely not true, I'm going to call you on it. And by the way, I am really good analytically, like I said, and I usually do a lot of homework. So over a period of time, most people don't take me on, but I am going to call you on it. But I learned to choose my words carefully. Rather than say, that makes no sense because XYZ, I would say, you know, Nathan, that's interesting. I had thought this, what am I missing? And I will give you a chance to graciously back off. I will also tell you that I started doing this later in my career. I didn't have a whole lot to prove. So I do believe when I talk about leadership and giving credit to others, I'm talking about by this time I'm CEO. When you're at the top, stop the I, except when things go wrong.
That's fantastic. I think there's some great, there's a lot of great angles to that, right? It's, can you tell us a little bit? So I'm guessing that a number of people are not familiar with Dun & Bradstreet and what they do. Can you walk us through what that looked like when you moved over, and also a bit about the context, because I mean, that was a particularly tumultuous time. I mean, there were things happening, right, as part of the macro context. Can you kind of walk us through and what leadership looked like for you?
Sure. So D&B is such an amazing story. I can talk about this company forever. I left P&G and went to another great values-driven company, and I joined in 2001 as their CFO. Now, at that time, the stock was at $20 a share. And literally, we spun Moody's out because Moody's was the favored child, and we were the ugly Cinderella of that story. So what had happened is Moody's and D&B were one company. Moody's was a high performer, D&B was not. Shareholders got together, fired the CEO, insisted that Moody's be spun out, and that's how D&B started out as this tiny little company. By the time it started trading, it dropped from 20 to 17, and nobody believed it had any prospects. We had a phenomenal CEO, Alan Lauren, who passed away earlier this year. He was a very close friend all the way to the very end, and I'm eternally grateful for how much he taught me about leadership. So what we did is step one was to put our financial house in order. Step two is get the strategy in place to return to growth. And as this was happening, as you can imagine, my responsibilities continued to grow. And as I started doing great things, I really did some pretty amazing things. I mean, if I may say so, I feel like I'm boasting. I hate doing that. Wasn't done alone, but was done with a group of people. You know, we partnered the entire international operation. And to give you a little bit of a sense, we were a company that was flat to declining top line, $20 a share and 15% margin and 7% of our revenue on the web. And then 5 years later, we are about $80 a stock, margins at 25%, 7% top line growth. and margins in, like 25, 30%. So an amazing transformation, okay? So all of us benefited tremendously from this. And then the crisis hits, and then the board tells me that I'm going to be the CEO. Now I got to be really honest with you, because if you think for some reason that I'm some special person who is, got these special gifts, so so I don't worry about things. The day I was told I'm going to be CEO, I didn't want the job, because I knew this company well, and I knew we were in a lot of trouble. And I didn't want to be CEO because I didn't see a bright future for the company and for me. And honestly, really honest with you, I wanted to run away. I even lined up another job. And it were not for Alan Lauren, the former CEO, who was like my kind of life coach mentor, who told me, he called me out as a quitter I am. I probably would have left and gone to this other job. But because he called me, this is why you need somebody as a coach, somebody to call you and to be tough on you. Don't be easy on me, right? And I decided to stay. And then I started this process of figuring out what are we going to do? Because remember, the crisis took its toll on the banks. The banks were our largest segments. They literally evaporated. So I decided that we were going to do an end-to-end replatform of all of our digital assets. And when the former CIO called me and told me he thought I was crazy, I probably should have listened. But see, I'm not a technologist, and I told you I'm not afraid to take risks. I decided we're going to do it, and I marched down the path. I made this huge investment to rebuild the infrastructure. Then 18 months later, yep, it happened. That big technology project completely off track, failing, okay? Now, I knew I had to take accountability for this. I had to take accountability internally with my team and externally with investors. So I'll start with internally. Like I said earlier, I stood in front of my team and I apologized for letting them down as their CEO, even as I told them we're going to get this back on track. It's so very important when things go wrong, not to pretend it's not there, because people know things went wrong. Now let's talk externally how that went. It was a complete disaster. Stock drops by 15% per day. By the end of the week, every analyst had a hold on my stock. And then, remember, negative sentiment starts to build, the shorts start to pile in. And by the end of 2012, D&B was one of the top 10 most shorted stocks in the S&P 500.
Which means, for those of you who aren't familiar, that means that people are betting against the company, taking their money and saying, this is going to collapse.
They are borrowing money and betting against me. And by the way, maybe that's why I like Elon Musk so much, because that's what happened to Tesla as well. Tesla was in the top most shorted stocks last year. Okay. Now, as if that all wasn't enough, I got an activist investor in my stock with a 7% ownership stake, a long list of demands. Top of that list is that I be stripped of chairman title so I can focus on just running the company as CEO. He actually, to be perfectly honest, there was so much more that he wanted. I'm going to spare you all the gory details. But when I think back of that time, that was one of the darkest times in my career. I'm often reminded of the saying, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. Because as painful as this was, grappling with this failure made me so much better as a leader. Most important, remember that apology that I made earlier to my team? Was the way my team responded. I received hundreds and thousands of employees emails. It brought the email system down. People were making personal commitments of support to get things back on track. And if anything, it just strengthened my resolve for fixing things. So at that point in time, I swung into action. I made two bets. Data as a service, which would allow our data to write in the cloud, not shackled by this database and our legacy infrastructure, and so that it could be easily available on mobile devices and pretty much anywhere. I inked a 7-year deal with Mark Benioff of Salesforce.com to put D&B inside. So I was essentially borrowing his assets. And then I doubled the investment in big data insights and analytics. This would not have been done without the work of Paul Ballou, a truly amazing chief data officer that I had. It was his idea and his belief that essentially I gave him the money to do. Now, we did that all, and then we made the last big bet, financial leverage. So we essentially levered up the company, and bought back 1/3 of the market cap in the open market in the form of share repurchase, not as Dutch auction, but literally we were in the market buying back every day to essentially put my money where our mouth is. So I not only said I'm going to do this, I doubled down in terms of my personal beliefs of what we could do. Now, what happened was textbook. We had the classic short squeeze. We performed, our stock popped. We went from 80 to 120. The activist who jumped into the stock at 60, remember, it was 80, we dropped down to 60. That's when the activist jumped, he left at 70. If he had waited another 18 months, he could have made so much more money. And it ended up really, really well. It bought us the time we needed. And ultimately, D&B went private for $150 last year, and I think it's back out public again. But the reason I share this story with you is this thing never ends. You are going to continue to make mistakes. The higher up you go, the more public and the more difficult they are to deal with, but you absolutely have the ability to make a difference.
And if I look at the chats, and this is something that we talked about even before it
I
started, we were having
the chats, by the way,
of a conversation that around this idea that a lot of people have this presumption that once you are a senior executive, CEO, or any type of senior executive, you sort of don't suffer from, self-doubt or struggling with a whole, everything from work-family challenges to whatever it is, right? Is that senior executives are just like you. And I'm not, and I don't take anything away from you, of course, when I say that. I know, Sarah, I mean, but that we're all human. We all suffer and we all have the same foibles and things. It shows up, and it shows up in a very public way. I think it's really awesome. Thank you for being so open and sharing some of the humanness of it. I think one question here, we've gotten to many of the questions through just you talking, which has been fantastic. Johanny says, I'm really good at putting out fires. And this is something that you hear often from people as they're waking. I'm really good at putting out fires, but not good at identifying how to prevent them. How do I become more of a strategic partner instead of being seen as a transactional employee? Thank you for that question, Johanny.
Right, and that's a great question, by the way. And when you're putting out fires is a very important skill. I actually believe if you can put the fire out, you would be on my list of people I need to take a hill, because you need people who can put out fires. The question that you're asking is a terrific question, which is, why are these fires even occurring? So start with a vision, right? What do you want it to be? So I don't know, maybe you're in the technology space. And if you think about technology, cyber, all of the business resilience, business continuity is really important. So maybe you have customer outages. So track the customer outages and set a ambitious goal. I want to have availability of my technology systems 99.99. D&B it was 5 nines, but let's call it 3 nines. Now measure where you were. And by the way, when I started out at D&B, we were at 70 something, 78 or 79, which was just unconscionable. But everybody seemed to be okay with it, including our customers. Then start before the fire happens. First, when you have a quiet period, talk about what would it take to get there. Now, how do you find out? Go look at other things where they're at 99.9. What do they do differently? What kind of monitoring they have? You might have a particularly troublesome app. Well, maybe it's time to actually update and replace. So I would say the important thing is, if you're having fires in your area repeatedly, make sure you get quiet time to think about why, and then put a plan in place. Set an ambitious goal. Never set a goal which is a little better than where you are, because by the way, that you could just do. You don't need to waste time, just go do that. When you set a very ambitious goal, you're engaging your prefrontal cortex. This is the executive function of the brain that allows you to think. And that thinking is what allows you to say, how can I do this? And now you're going to have to take some risk. The way do you take risk? I would say fail early, fail cheap, fail a lot. Try a little experiment. Cordon off an area and then try this thing and see if it works. Are you getting up to 99.9? Now start to expand it out. This is absolutely something you can do. And above all, believe you can. Because sometimes, and I often say, and we should do this to have the talk for another day, is that conversation you have with yourself in your head. And by the way, you are all having it right now. I don't know what it is. You might say, she seems, she's just very lucky. She doesn't understand my situation. This conversation is going on right now in your head, in every one of your heads. What are those thoughts? Are they negative? If they're negative, you got to go and understand why, because you have to flip it to be more positive. You have to go from I can't to I can. I won't to I will. So belief and what goes on in your head is so very important, because we fill our heads up with all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, there's enough social media, enough stuff to fill your head. You make up your mind, and then you believe I can't do it. You absolutely can. Everybody can.
Manny, any thoughts or questions as we get near to wrapping up?
Well, I mean, I think, it's been, extremely insightful, Sarah. I think, for people, and I see all the comments as well, and we have several hundred people on this chat, and, they are really, getting tremendous inspiration from your comments and insights. And clearly, you've lived through all this. It's not a hypothetical. This is not a fictional account or a fictional story. This is real life, that you were able to go from clerk to chairperson and do all the amazing things that you've done. I guess, my comment to you would be, and by the way, I hope that very soon, when the pandemic is over, we'll have you actually on campus.
Yeah. By the way, I'm just looking at the chat right now. I hadn't opened up my chat. There are some great comments like, have you ever felt the imposter syndrome and how do you deal with it? Not really. I am unapologetically who I am, and that gets other people upset. So when I go home to India, some people think I'm too Americanized. Yeah, sorry, this is who I am. When I'm here, people think I may be too conservative. I feel it's important to find who you really are and be authentic, because life becomes easier. Now, who you are may not be perfect. I'm not a perfect person. I make mistakes. I do stupid stuff. But then it's so easy to say, oh my God, I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? There's one gift I have is I can tell if I hurt your feelings because I look at the expression on your face. I read faces really well, which is why I miss, not seeing all of you. So no, you don't have to be, suffer from imposter. Be who you are and be unapologetically who you are. Because essentially, who you are, your best self, is the only way you will achieve greatness, which, as I told you at the outset, each and every one of you is capable of it. I'm just looking through all of these.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic, and I want to be mindful of that. But it's really clear that we could go on. We could go on again, go on further for quite.
Can I take one more? Can I take one more?
Sure. Yeah.
This is a good one. Can Miss Mathew share a story? I'm picking these randomly, guys, of a challenge she faced in the work field as a minority woman, an inexperienced employee. And yes, I can. It was a story of my life early on. I'll give you this story as this is absolutely true. At P&G, when you were a clerk, you didn't eat lunch with the managers. And one day, very early on, I didn't know this, I was brand new. I sat down with my manager for lunch. And by the way, I knew something was wrong, okay? So I felt terrible because I embarrassed my manager by sitting down with her. The managers ate lunch together, the clerks ate lunch together. And I'm gonna tell you, these are examples where you feel really, really terrible, but do something about it. What I did is I went up to her after lunch and I said, Candy, I'm so sorry. Apparently I'm not supposed to eat lunch with you. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. And she said, absolutely not. We eventually became really good friends, by the way. And actually from then on, St. Bernard plant, managers and clerks ate lunch together. So my point is, oftentimes when you have a story of a challenge, it's embarrassing and you don't want to do anything about it. You should, because if it bothers you, it's going to rattle around you in your head and it gets in the way of everything else. If you actually try to address it with the person directly or with a friend. And if you address it with the person and they're really upset with you, try to count to 3, because the single worst thing you can do is get terribly upset. So part of this is about managing your emotions. It's managing your thinking. That's like a conversation for another day. I got to stop. I know it's 11 o'clock and we may be out of time.
Well,
Back to you. I could keep going, guys.
Yeah, what a treat, though. Thank you, Manny. Any closing thoughts? And I'll just do a quick wrap up at the end.
Well, dare to dream. Sarah, thank you very much for your time. We could go on here for hours. We look forward to having you on campus
That would be
very soon,
wonderful.
and keep the conversation going. Thank you. Dr.
We,
Hiller?
yeah, boy, you know, I just again want to thank you, Sarah, and I want to thank everyone who it came on from, as you saw, all over the country, and I know even all over the world. It never ceases to amaze us, the draw that we have from all over and from all walks of life, from people in all different stages and phases. So I want to thank you as the participants for showing up and being so active and engaged. I think we as at the Center for Leadership feel really fortunate to have you in our corner and have you continue to engage with us. And I think, you know, what a great day here. We had one of the most powerful, influential women in business in the world. And I think what you saw and what you see here is that she's open and honest and genuine and truly excellent. And so I see all the thank yous and again, so thank you all. Look for the other ways to connect with us. You know where to find us at the center, right? FIU, Center for Leadership, Lead FIU. You can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. We are everywhere, and we look forward to engaging with you all again. And we look forward to hosting Sarah one day on campus in Miami.